The summer of 1999 in Marion, Ohio, was one of those slow, restless seasons when the air shimmered with heat and the days felt endless. Kids rode bikes through quiet neighborhoods, families gathered for barbecues, and the small city of 35,000 moved to the rhythm of familiar routines. But on the night of July 17, that calm was shattered, when 18-year-old Megan Ralston vanished without a trace. Megan was in that fragile, hopeful stage of life between high school and adulthood. She had graduated just a month earlier, saving money for college by working evenings at a grocery store on Mount Vernon Avenue. Friends described her as kind, a little shy but always smiling, the sort of person who made others feel comfortable just by being there. She loved photography, played piano at her church on Sundays, and had recently been accepted to Ohio State University for the fall. Her life was supposed to be just beginning. On that warm July night, Megan finished her shift at 9:00 p.m. She called her mother, told her she was on her way home, and got into her silver 1995 Honda Civic. The drive from work to her family's house on the south side of town should have taken 10 minutes, but she never made it. When 10:00 came and went with no sign of her, her mother began to worry. By midnight, panic had replaced worry. The family called police, and an officer was dispatched to take a missing persons report. At first, they thought maybe Megan had gone to see friends or taken a late detour, but those hopes faded quickly when her friends confirmed they hadn't seen or heard from her since she left work. The next morning, police located her car in a gravel pull-off near a stretch of farmland about 5 miles from her route home. The driver's door was unlocked, her purse and keys still inside, and the driver's seat pushed slightly back, as if someone taller had been there. Tire impressions in the dirt suggested another vehicle had pulled up beside hers. Search teams scoured the area, combing through tall grass and soybean fields. They found one of Megan's sneakers about 40 yards from the road, lying on its side near a broken patch of brush, but no sign of her. For the people of Marion, the news was almost unthinkable. This wasn't the kind of town where people disappeared. Church bells rang on Sundays, the fairgrounds hosted summer picnics, and the high school's football team was the pride of the city. But now, as police cruisers rolled through quiet streets and helicopters hovered above cornfields, a sense of fear crept in. Posters went up across town. Local TV stations showed her senior portrait, blonde hair over her shoulder, eyes bright and confident. Volunteers lined up to help search, and neighbors left porch lights on at night for Megan, hoping somehow she'd see them and come home. Detectives from the Marion County Sheriff's Office began interviewing everyone who'd seen her that day. Coworkers said she left work alone, as usual. A witness later reported seeing a light-colored pickup truck pulled off the same road where her car was found around 9:30 p.m., but the sighting was too vague to identify the driver. Days turned into weeks, no ransom notes, no calls, no trace. Then, in early August, a farmer discovered a torn piece of fabric tangled in his fence, a blue cotton shirt that matched what Megan had been wearing the night she vanished. It was about 2 miles from where her car had been found. That clue narrowed the search area, but when ground teams and dogs combed the woods beyond the field, they found nothing more. By fall, the investigation had stalled. Tips slowed, leads dried up, and frustration grew. Her parents appeared on local news begging for answers, holding her photograph in shaking hands. "Somebody knows something," her father said through tears. "Please, we just want our daughter back." But in the end, the silence was complete. By winter 2000, the case went cold, another name in the thick binder of unsolved disappearances. But what no one knew then was that the truth had been there from the very beginning, hidden in a handful of overlooked details, waiting for the right person and the right time to finally piece them together. In the first few months after Megan Ralston's disappearance, the Marion County Sheriff's Office poured every available resource into the search. Detectives retraced her last known steps, canvassed her workplace, and interviewed anyone who might have seen her that night. For a while, it felt like half the town was helping. Strangers dropped off food for the volunteers. Businesses printed missing posters for free, and dozens of people joined daily searches across the farmland. But by late August 1999, it was clear they were chasing ghosts. Detectives began focusing on Megan's inner circle. They questioned coworkers, classmates, and a young man she'd recently been dating, Tyler Henson, a 20-year-old mechanic from nearby Prospect. Tyler was cooperative, nervous, but not defensive. He told detectives they'd spent time together a few days before she vanished, and that he'd been home the night she disappeared, watching TV with his parents. His alibi checked out. Then came another name, Frank Delaney, a 38-year-old local who did occasional maintenance work at the grocery store where Megan was employed. He was quiet, lived alone, and had a reputation for making awkward comments to younger women. Several coworkers told police that Megan had once mentioned feeling uncomfortable around him, though she'd laughed it off. Detectives interviewed Delaney at his apartment. He denied knowing anything about her disappearance and said he was home that night watching baseball. There was no physical evidence to tie him to the scene, and without probable cause, police couldn't press further. Still, his name remained circled in red in the case file. By September, the investigation had expanded beyond Marion County. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation assisted with forensic testing on the items found in Megan's car, her purse, the fabric of her seatbelt, and the sneaker found in the grass. They lifted partial fingerprints from the car door handle, but the prints were smudged and incomplete, making it impossible to confirm a match. Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl through town. Some said Megan had run away to escape the pressures of college. Others believed she'd been abducted by someone passing through. Truckers, strangers, ex-boyfriends, everyone became a suspect in conversation. But inside the sheriff's office, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had taken her wasn't a stranger. It had happened too close to home, too cleanly, too fast. By late fall, one more lead surfaced, a man named Rick Boylan who had worked security at a nearby warehouse. He drove a light-colored Ford pickup, similar to the one seen near Megan's car. Detectives questioned him, but he insisted he'd been working a night shift. The company's time records confirmed it. Another dead end. When winter arrived and the first snow fell, the search was officially scaled back. The command post was taken down. The volunteers went home. Detective Mark Jensen, who had led the case from day one, wrote a final note in his file that December. Evidence insufficient. Case open, pending new developments. For Megan's parents, life became a quiet routine of waiting. Every birthday, every Christmas, every passing year, they kept her room exactly as it was, a bed neatly made, camera on the dresser, her favorite sweater folded at the foot. They refused to give up, but as the years stretched on, the hope they held began to blur into something more like endurance. In 2005, 6 years after the disappearance, new cadaver dogs were brought in during a research of the wooded areas south of Marion, but again, nothing. By 2010, the case was considered inactive. The detectives who had once led the search had either retired or transferred. The boxes holding her files were pushed to the back of the evidence room, another unsolved tragedy frozen in time. And there they would stay for more than 2 decades. Until one small discovery, made purely by chance, cracked open everything. It was the spring of 2021 when the name Megan Ralston surfaced again, long after most people had stopped expecting it to. A young construction crew was clearing ground for a housing development near a stretch of farmland just outside Marion, only a few miles from where Megan's car had been found back in 1999. One of the workers noticed something strange while digging through a patch of clay and gravel. At first, he thought it was just a piece of old animal bone, but when he saw the curve of a small human jaw, he froze. The site was immediately shut down, and the Marion County Sheriff's Office returned to a scene many of them hadn't thought about in years. Among them was Detective Laura Mackenzie, a newly promoted investigator who joined the department long after Megan's case had gone cold. She'd read the old reports before, dozens of pages detailing the early searches, interviews, and endless frustration of those who had come before her. Now, she was standing at what might finally be the missing piece. Forensic teams spent 2 days carefully recovering the remains. What they found was heartbreaking: a shallow grave containing partial skeletal remains, fragments of clothing, and what appeared to be the frame of a wristwatch. The watch face was cracked, but still faintly visible, and when it was cleaned, the initials MR were engraved on the back. It was Megan's. The discovery reignited an investigation that had been dormant for over 2 decades. The remains were sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation Lab for DNA testing. Because of how degraded the samples were, analysts used advanced methods that hadn't existed back in 1999, mitochondrial DNA sequencing and next-generation analysis that could identify family relationships even from trace material. After several weeks of testing, the results were clear. The remains belonged to Megan Ralston, missing since June 1999. For her parents, the news brought a strange kind of peace. They finally knew, but along with that peace came renewed pain and new questions. Who had done this? Why had it taken so long? Detective Mackenzie, now leading the revived investigation, began combing through the old case files. She noticed something interesting about the original suspects. One of them, Frank Delaney, the quiet handyman, had stayed in the area for several more years before moving to southern Ohio. Another, Tyler Henson, had relocated out of state but still kept in touch with some of Megan's old friends. Mackenzie requested updated DNA samples from both men, voluntary at first. Tyler agreed immediately. Frank did not. He said he'd done all that before and didn't want to be bothered. His reaction, defensive and curt, stood out. Meanwhile, forensic analysts were also re-examining evidence that had been stored since the original investigation, most notably, Megan's car. The vehicle had been preserved in an evidence lot all those years, covered and locked away. Technicians carefully swabbed the driver's side door handle, seatbelt, and steering wheel again, this time using far more sensitive DNA technology than existed in 1999. And that's when they found it, a partial male DNA profile on the fabric of the seatbelt. It was too partial to run a full CODIS match at first, but the lab was able to develop a viable sequence. When they entered it into the national database, no direct hits came back, but analysts then used genetic genealogy, comparing the DNA with open-source databases to locate distant relatives. Within weeks, a match appeared, a family line traced to a small group in southern Ohio, with one name that immediately caught the detective's eye: Frank Delaney. He was still alive, living in a small trailer outside Portsmouth, Ohio. He'd never left the state, never changed his name, and had never been arrested for any major crime. But the science and his history were lining up too neatly to ignore. In early 2022, investigators quietly began building their case. They conducted surveillance, collected discarded items, coffee cups, cigarette butts, and grocery bags from Delaney's trash, each one a potential goldmine for DNA. When the lab compared the discarded sample with the profile from Megan's seatbelt, the results were decisive. It was a 99.98% match. After 23 years of silence, police finally had their suspect. On a cold February morning, a convoy of cruisers rolled up the narrow dirt road to Delaney's trailer. He stepped out in a faded jacket, confused but calm, as detectives approached. When told he was being arrested for the murder of Megan Ralston, he barely reacted. "I knew this day was coming," he muttered. The officers later described the moment as surreal. A man who had lived quietly among them for decades, now exposed by science that hadn't even existed when the crime was committed. But while his DNA tied him to the scene, no one yet knew why. That answer, and the full picture of what really happened in 1999 would only emerge after months of interrogation, evidence analysis, and a confession that would chill even veteran investigators. In the days following Frank Delaney's arrest, Marion County felt frozen in disbelief. For 23 years, the man had blended into the background, mowing his lawn, shopping at the same grocery store where Megan once worked, even nodding politely at her father once in passing at a hardware store. Now, his mugshot filled every local news broadcast, his eyes flat and expressionless, his name finally tied to the nightmare that had haunted the town for decades. Detectives transported Delaney back to Marion under heavy security. In the interrogation room, he sat across from Detective Mackenzie, silent for nearly an hour before he spoke. When he finally did, his words came slowly, almost detached, as if he were describing something that had happened to someone else. He admitted that he'd known Megan casually, that she'd been polite to him at work but distant. He'd taken her friendliness as interest. The night she disappeared, he said, he'd seen her car parked by the old highway. He claimed he'd pulled over just to talk. But as the detectives pressed him, his tone shifted. What began as a denial unraveled into something darker, a confrontation that turned violent after she rejected his advances. He said she tried to leave, that she made him feel small, and in that flash of anger he struck her. He paused for a long moment before admitting that she fell, hit her head, and stopped breathing. Then he panicked. He took her car off the road, wiped it down, and carried her body to a wooded patch near his home. He buried her there before dawn. When Mackenzie asked why he never came forward, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. "I didn't think anyone would find her, and they didn't for a long time." The interview ended in silence. Within weeks, prosecutors charged Delaney with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Because Ohio had abolished the death penalty for certain historic cases committed before 2005, the prosecution sought life without parole. The trial began in May 2023, held at the Marion County Courthouse, the same building where Megan's parents had attended every annual vigil for over 2 decades. The courtroom was packed, with reporters from Columbus and Cleveland covering what was now being called the Ralston case. The prosecution's case was airtight. They presented the DNA match from the car seatbelt, the genetic genealogy trail linking Delaney's relatives, and the recovered remains that corroborated his confession. They even found trace fibers in his old storage unit that matched the interior fabric of Megan's car, proof that he'd tampered with it after the crime. The defense tried to cast doubt, arguing that Delaney's confession had been coerced, that he was confused and overwhelmed by the interrogation process. But the jury didn't buy it. His own words, calm and factual, were played aloud. Every detail matched the forensic record. When Megan's mother took the stand, the courtroom went still. She spoke not just of the grief, but of the years of living without answers, the empty seat at every family dinner, the unopened gifts for birthdays that never came. Her voice trembled, but she never broke. "I used to tell myself that she was still out there somewhere," she said quietly. "But now I know she wasn't alone all these years. We never stopped looking for her." After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Frank Delaney showed no reaction as the words were read. No apology, no emotion, just that same distant stare. At sentencing, Judge Karen Blevins addressed him directly. "You took a young woman's life and denied her family peace for nearly a quarter of a century. You thought time would protect you. But time, Mr. Delaney, is what finally brought justice." He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Megan's parents spoke briefly. Her father said softly, "We waited 24 years to hear the truth. It doesn't make the loss easier, but now she can finally rest." For the first time in decades, Marion County felt a strange quiet. not the uneasy silence of unanswered questions, but the kind that comes when a chapter, however painful, has finally closed. But for Detective Mackenzie, the case represented more than a solved file. It was a testament to persistence of proof that science, compassion, and time could still outlast the silence of evil. Yet the story didn't truly end there. Because even after the conviction, one final discovery revealed a haunting detail that no one had expected. A detail that shed new light on just how long Delaney had been hiding his darkness. After the trial, the town of Marion, Ohio, slowly began to heal. The courthouse that had once echoed with decades of frustration was now quiet, its halls lined with reporters packing up and residents leaving with damp eyes and heavy hearts. For most, the case was finally over. But for those who had lived under its shadow, the Ralston family, the original detectives, and the small-town neighbors who had searched those fields all those years ago, the end felt less like closure and more like release. Detective Laura Mackenzie stayed behind long after the cameras were gone. For weeks, she sorted through the remaining evidence, boxes of old reports, film photographs from 1999, taped interviews, and items that had never been logged digitally. She wanted everything to be complete before she sealed the final case summary. That's when she found it, a small, unmarked envelope at the bottom of the oldest evidence box. Inside was a Polaroid photograph, yellowed and warped by age. It showed a gravel road, a patch of weeds, and what looked like a parked car, Megan's old Honda Civic. The back of the photo had a date, May 30, 1999, 1 week before she disappeared. When Mackenzie compared the background of the image to known locations, her heart sank. The photo had been taken near the wooded area where Megan's remains were later found, meaning someone, likely Delaney, had been scouting the site days before the crime. It wasn't a random act, it had been planned. Further investigation into Delaney's past revealed something else that chilled investigators. In 1986, when he lived briefly in southern Indiana, a young woman named Janice Moore had gone missing after her car was found abandoned near a service road. Her case was never solved. The description of that disappearance, the location, the timing, the circumstances, all mirrored Megan's. When Ohio detectives reached out to Indiana State Police, they confirmed that no DNA had ever been collected in that case. But when they re-examined evidence, a piece of rope and a hair sample preserved in a sealed bag, modern testing revealed a partial DNA profile. The result was startling, a familial match to Frank Delaney. Though the evidence was too degraded for prosecution, investigators quietly concluded that Megan's killer might have struck before, that her case had finally revealed the pattern of a predator who'd escaped justice for nearly 40 years. News of that connection was never formally announced, but word spread quietly among law enforcement circles. It changed how local agencies viewed their archives, prompting renewed reviews of other unsolved disappearances from the 1980s and 90s. For the Ralston family, the revelation didn't bring anger, just a deeper sorrow, but also a gratitude that Megan's case had finally stopped him, even if she'd never lived to see that day. In early 2024, the Marion community held a candlelight vigil near the site where her remains were found. Dozens of people gathered, holding candles that flickered against the cold spring wind. The pastor who spoke that evening reminded everyone that Megan's story was not only about loss, but about persistence, the unwavering belief that truth will surface, no matter how many years pass. A new plaque was placed there, engraved with her name and a line that read, "For every unanswered question, may there one day be light." Detective Mackenzie, standing quietly at the back of the crowd, watched Megan's parents place flowers beneath the plaque. She thought about the first time she'd opened the case file, the faded handwriting, the grainy photos, the sense of hopelessness that once hung over every page. Now, it was all written in ink and truth. Before leaving that night, she closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "Case closed." In a small county evidence locker, the boxes labeled Ralston, Megan, 1999 were finally sealed for the last time. Not forgotten but finished. And somewhere, deep in the quiet fields of Marion County, the echoes of a long search faded into peace, proof that even the coldest cases can still find their warmth in the light of truth.